so there's the role of power relations at the COP itself, which is like this 2 week period, and then there's the role of power relations in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is just this continuous thing that keeps it's a process. And so, I mean, if actors aren't included or don't have the structural resources to be able to engage fully throughout the process, um, then as I mentioned before, it's really the agreements and the conversations that are happening in the months before COP that shape what's going to happen at the COP. And so, you know, one potential positive thing, but also a concern that I've heard raised, is that the UK having the chair of the G7 right now. There'll be a meeting, I think, in Cornwall in late June, and there's going to be a lot of discussion at that meeting, for example, of uh, what the plans are for the Conference of Parties. Of course, the G7 is a group of very heavily industrialized, powerful countries. And so if you're talking about the difference in power relations, it's like, okay, well, if if that's the party where we're deciding, what the framework's going to be for COP, and the other, various other parties. I mean, it's 7 countries, right? The G7. So I mean, that obviously is, like 185 other people, other countries that aren't being included there. Well, that might be an issue. On the other hand, the UK government has been doing a fairly decent job, it seems, of trying to identify leaders from a range of countries throughout the world, both global north and global south, more developed, less developed nations, and trying to develop to identify a range of leaders who have worked on different issues in um, climate action, and they're putting together, or I think it's already assembled, but maybe they're adding more people to it, sort of like this dream team or something. I don't know if that's their rhetoric or it was some media branding of them, but they have this like dream team of folks who represent a range of um, structural issues in the negotiation, is the finances, the justice issues, and so it does seem that they're at least bringing together the right actors. In the end, whether those actors, whether their voice is heard, we'll have to see. But another thing that I would say about the power differences, if we look back to COP 20 or COP 21, so Paris in 2015. There was that high ambition coalition, which was this group between, I guess it was the EU, but predominantly the Nordic countries. And then they came into conversation with AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States. And I think that was being led by the Marshall Islands at the time. And so that high ambition coalition, it's like, okay, well, that shows that maybe countries that have structurally less power, or less developed nations, are coming into conversation. But it's a bit of a it's a bit of a nuanced situation, because I think the reason that AOSIS in particular came into conversation was that they compromised on some of their own values and said, hey, like, the reality of climate change is changing. We know that climate change is progressing faster than we thought it would. We know that the sea levels are rising, and particularly for those countries, it's really an existential threat. And so maybe they compromised on some of their own values, with everyone now taking on commitments, because that wasn't the case before. And in the previous climate commitments, it was that some of the less developed countries didn't have their own they're voluntary reductions in carbon emissions, but now everyone has their own individually determined national contribution. And so I think the reality of climate change will be one thing that perhaps in this conference as well, and the speed of climate change and real concerns that we need some action, even if it's not what we wanted, I think may force some of the less powerful actors to compromise, again, on their own, on what would have been their own position had they had a different negotiating position.